hating and closeted and so on and so forth. Something happened in me. I couldn't, something broke or something. I couldn't do this. I tried to be honest about my quandary with this guy, this therapist, in his office, and he would poo-poo the whole thing about if I wanted to try out not being judgmental towards feeling homosexual feeling and what that could feel like. I wanted to try that out with his support. And he not only couldn't understand that, but he attacked that. And he thought it would be very damaging for me. So I had several sessions with this guy, right, if you can picture this, in which he would try to prevent me from going in this direction in my sessions with him. And I had to figure it out. I was on the overt level. There was no gay lib organizations. There was nothing but the very beginnings of this kind of interest in standing up for a kind of identity based on this, okay, or this esteeming of this homosexual thing. It's still relatively pretty new stuff. It was in the air. This might have been 1971 by this time, 1971 by this time. So it's after Stonewall. It's in the air at UCLA. But I knew there was a bigger world, and I got fed up. You know, a buddy of mine from high school had gone to UC Berkeley instead of UCLA, and I spent a couple of weeks with him over the holidays, and I thought, wow, it's like a whole other world up there. So I transferred in for my third year. I ceased being a UCLA student. And so you picture with my therapist, I'm telling him I want to explore this experience, that he can't support me trying to feel what homosexual desire feels like in a supportive, caring way, and I can explore that life. I wanted to explore that life. If this therapist couldn't help me do that, I wanted to find another way. I was really dumb. You know, I grew up here in Hawthorne, this town called Hawthorne here, which is near the airport, in utter idiocy, where you have nothing below the waist and no one talks about sex. It's hard to imagine now what life might have been like, say, when I was a little kid in the 50s or the 60s. It's awful, just awful, okay? Very hard to picture, perhaps, what it would be like, how repressive. And they thought this was healthy, like for children to grow up with nothing at all. There were no books in my home. I'm serious. I had a stupid family existence. Okay, and I went to plod to school every day with this damn stupid high school, Auburn High School it's called. It's still there. Now mainly minority people go to it. It's now mainly a minority area. But when I was this youngster, it was a white working class area, but they were well enough off to get mortgages and get these homes. So after I was about 4, my parents got this home from the bank. And that's where I grew up for most of my life in this town. So I went to high school. My mother told me proudly after, "I waited to move to Redondo Beach." They moved. "We waited until after you graduated from high school so you could stay in the same place." So I could graduate from this Hawthorne High School. How can, I don't know about you guys, but by the time I was already 13, I'm feeling pretty homosexual. How do you keep that under wraps, and then you have to go to the high school experience and all that, and handle all that stuff. At that time, if you can imagine this world in which such people, homosexuals, don't exist. There's nothing about that. If anyone's saying anything about the Mattachine Society, it's not to me. I would have known nothing about this stuff back then. Nothing about this. So then, what's going to happen, is the story that I'm describing. It's just my own particular story, but it's only relevant because it relates to then what became of interest to others and a way of thinking about things. And I wasn't anticipating any of that development. It's just kind of the way things unfolded. So when I saw this book, when I saw these 2 books on the reading list, I thought it'd be really interesting to describe some of the context. I just shared a little piece. Otherwise you don't know. Who would know? Not only not know, who would care? Okay. So I don't invite you to go, just because I'm babbling about this stuff. So in a way, not prepared. So that it's more like, because you can get the prepared stuff from reading. But this other kind of stuff, like when I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a bit, but this other stuff can't be read about. It's the personal stuff. It's the personal life. So that's better to kind of share that. So to share the context. So next month we'll do an analogous thing with this book. You know, how my thinking got more advanced as I was trying to live this life, and why it became like this. I'll get into that next month. You know, why it ceased to be like this and became like this. This month is about why it became like this from what it was. I've described a little what it was. If you can picture that for any of you who've lived that kind of life, you know, meaning you're with other straight people or whoever, but everyone's closeted. If they're not completely straight, they're closeted. And it's all hidden, it's on the side, and you're in whatever kind of activist stuff you were. So my activism started with when I graduated from high school. So in the context that I were in that were like this, that my early activism was involved in, like when I started with college, I was an activist in 2 different ways. And in each kind of way, it was ultra-closeted stuff. I've been introduced to activism at the age of 13, and already found it to be incredibly closeted, but that was through my own self-awareness and self-hatred, even at the age of 13. I despised myself for being homosexual. I didn't know what to do with it. You know, because you had to be closeted, you couldn't talk to anyone about it. It made it all the more awful, god-awful, and miserable. So I thought that would be, otherwise who would kind of know these things? Why would anyone care, you see? Now we've been books like this have been superseded, okay? You have to understand the world in which first of all people communicate through hardcover books. For those of you who aren't aware of that, okay? And, books were tightly controlled by the government in the 40s, supposedly because of the war, and in the 50s because of communism, supposedly, and then into the 60s. Maybe some of you who've read your gay history know about the lawsuit against anti-homosexual stuff, you know, by a couple of gay organizations in the 50s, contributed, and other more hetero-seeming people also suing the government over using mail laws, mainly, to control whether or not you could read smut. See smut or read smut. Believe it or not, there was a time when the government said, you bad children, you can't see smut. People saw smut all over the place. But it was bad, and you were a dirty thing if you had smut. So it was this big deal when this stupid book came out. You know, called The Joy of Sex. This must have been, about 1972? We can look it up, when the original might have come out. It was called The Joy of Sex. It was basically a manual on how you have sex, but it was for heterosexual men and women. How do men and women have sex? Well, it was. And it has different chapters on this kind of thing, and that kind of thing, and the other kind of thing. And it was all part of this way. You probably all heard about it, like the sexual revolution and that aspect of things of the 60s and all that, as it kind of moved into the 70s. It became like more open about being sexual, and there was things like wife swapping and stuff like that, and there were other things like gay liberation. So gay liberation was of that era, let's call it the late 60s, early 70s. I think folks who might have been a little older than me, but in the kind of role I was in, just got more and more tired of being activists, wanting to live a life that was based on principle and meaning rather than just eating and shitting for the powers that be, and but having to repress homosexuality and being able to live that way. Now, I did fully expect if I wasn't repressing it, maybe I would become like what people today talk about in terms of their interest in gay marriage and living a gay lifestyle, as if it was another lifestyle, like being hetero. It's just your sex of your partner is different. Okay, but back then, that was just one branch of how people thought about these things. When I was struggling with my own therapist, and I was an undergraduate at UCLA, I didn't know any of this. None of this was allowed to be known. I didn't know it from growing up. I didn't know it from UCLA. My first 2 years of school, I knew nothing. When I went to UC Berkeley, I didn't learn any of this in school. What I'm sharing with you. None of it was covered in school, except a little touches of the psychological part in terms of my interest in psychology. Not even then. Academia was long ago taken over pretty much by what I would call anti-psychological people, opposed to what we might call psychoanalytic understanding of things, or psychoanalytic methodology of things. Long ago has that been the case. And opposes, philosophically opposes. Usually doesn't say so. It's usually implicit. We might call it passive-aggressive. A powerful example of how the system works. The powerful system we live in. So when I told my therapist, okay, picture this, I'm 18 years old, or I'm on the verge of being 18, and I tell my therapist, I'm tired of living such, not on the verge of 18, I've been with him since I've been 18. I may be 19 and a half, on the verge of 20, that must be what it is. It gets hazy in my head, so long ago. I'm sorry, my apologies, it gets a little woozy, what exactly the dates are, the years. It's so long ago now, humans are mortal beings, okay? So my apologies if I do that sort of thing in my head while I'm sharing with you. Okay, but this was considered very respectable at the time. This may seem to you really something, what I'm going to describe, but believe it or not, this was considered very respectable. I told my therapist, I was sitting in my hour with him, paying my money, and I told my therapist I didn't want to continue to put down these desires of being homosexual. I didn't want to follow out this pro-hetero direction anymore. And I really wanted him to support me, and I was getting really tired of coming to see him, and he only attacked that. And he said, I would regret it forever if I became a homosexual. I would regret it forever. It was a life of the gutter. He said, looking at my face, he said, you will lead a life of the gutter if you become homosexual. Please don't do it. He equated identifying with one's homosexuality with a life of the gutter. And he used that phrase repeatedly. And I then, and this has been going on for several sessions, as I mentioned to you, I then said to him, I want to follow that way anyway. And to learn about it, I was still trying to be a scientist, so to speak. I was not yet homosexual, let's call it, in terms of being self-confirmed, though I felt the desire. But I wanted out of the cage, let's say, and I told him something like that, and I rose up to leave the session. I said, if you're not going to help me, I'm going to leave. He rose up out of his chair and stood in the doorway and physically blocked it and said to me, again looking me in the face, it would be a terrible shame if you were to have to become homosexual and live a life of the gutter. I won't let you do it. And he physically stood in the doorway, physically blocking it, and was well aware he was doing that, preventing me from leaving. Physically leaving the office. And remember, nowadays we usually talk about protecting the therapist from the client. So you have to picture it's a weird world back then, so to speak, in some weird, strange ways. This is a very respectable guy. This is not some snooty little weirdo. Okay, so I looked at him and I kind of pointed out with my other hand, I pointed out something that was very obvious. If you would have been in the room, you would have noticed this. You weren't there, so you would have noticed it. It was very obvious. And I pointed out to him, I said, the doctor, there is another exit entrance. He was a very old-fashioned type, and he had a separate entrance in it from the exit. You entered in one door where it was a little waiting room and you waited for the next session. And then there was a separate door so the people, the next person waiting in the waiting room didn't see you. You didn't see them when you left the session. And I pointed out to him there was another door. And he couldn't stand in front of each of the doors. He was not like Brahma, whoever, who could be in two places at once. As much as he might want to. There were two damn doors in that office, consulting room. And I pointed that out, and he gave up at that point. He didn't leave. Saying, as I walked out, it will be a life of the gutter. Like it's a lasting message. He wouldn't quit. He's kept it up. But he didn't try and block. Once I pointed out there were two doors in the room, I didn't care if I walked past the next patient. Because he was blocking the exit door that you usually use to leave the room. For me, that was earth-shaking. experiments, as you can imagine. That's like, wow.